My hands trembled as I watched Rosalind, my daughter of 30 years, gliding through the living room. Her arms were outstretched, her eyes full of a future she believed was hers. "The house has good bones, Dad, but it needs some modernization before I move in," she said, her voice full of a confident cheer that cut right through me. She was measuring windows, already planning to turn this quiet 3-bedroom home, the only one she'd ever known, into her own. I had spent decades carrying a secret that was heavier than any house. It had been my constant companion, a silent burden I had promised to bear to protect the 2 people I loved most. But now, seeing her so full of hope, so certain of a future built on a foundation of my lies, I knew the time had come to set us both free. "Rosalind," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "we need to talk." She didn't hear me. She was too lost in her vision, a world of new paint, open walls, and modernized kitchens. She was planning to renovate a house she could never own with money she'd saved for a future I had constructed from a moment of betrayal. A betrayal that had occurred before she could even walk. My wife, Helena, and I had tried for years to have a child. Month after month, we were met with the soul-crushing disappointment of failure. We'd poured all our savings into endless fertility treatments, and with each failed attempt, I watched Helena sink deeper into a despair that terrified me. Then, one evening, she returned home with a light in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her face streaked with tears of joy. My relief was short-lived. 3 months later, I found the letters. She had been having an affair with her fertility specialist, Dr. Richard Peaton. The child she carried wasn't the miracle we had prayed for. It was the result of their betrayal, conceived in his office while I was at home, naively picking out colors for a nursery. I confronted her that night. She broke down, begging me not to leave. "This baby is innocent," she sobbed. "Whatever you think of me, this child deserves a father." Every rational part of me screamed to walk away, to pack my bags, and file for divorce. But then I looked at her, at the way she cradled her belly, at the hope that had finally returned to her eyes, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. Not for her, and certainly not for the innocent life she carried. So, I made a choice that would define the next 3 decades of my life. I stayed. I raised Rosalind as my own, loving her as fiercely as if she were my biological daughter. We buried the secret so deep that sometimes I almost forgot it existed. But Richard Peaton never forgot. When Rosalind turned 18, the letters began to arrive. Not for Helena, but for me. He wrote about watching his daughter from afar, about his pride in the woman she was becoming, and about his desperate need to be a part of her life. I burned every single one. When she graduated college, he sent flowers with a card signed, "From someone who's always believed in you." She thought it was from a secret admirer and laughed about it for weeks. I made sure it never happened again. For 10 years, I ran interference, a silent guardian of a truth she didn't know existed. Helena died of cancer when Rosalind was 22, taking our secret with her and leaving me alone to carry the weight of a truth that grew heavier with each passing year. But Richard was getting older, and with age came a sense of urgency. 2 weeks before that morning, a registered letter arrived from his attorney. Dr. Richard Peaton was dying of lung cancer and had approximately 6 months to live. He was demanding the right to meet his biological daughter. If I continued to prevent contact, he would take legal action, prove paternity, and tell Rosalind the truth himself. The letter included DNA evidence, medical records, and photographs he'd secretly taken of her at her graduation, her wedding, and even the birth of her own children. He had been watching our family for decades, documenting his connection to a daughter who had no idea he existed. But there was something Richard Peaton didn't know, something his lawyers didn't understand. I wasn't just the man who raised her. I was also the man who had legally adopted her when she was just 6 months old. It was a fail-safe Helena and I had put in place to ensure no one could ever question my parental rights. And when Helena died, I became the sole beneficiary of everything she owned, including a trust fund her wealthy grandmother had established specifically for Rosalind's inheritance. The house she was now planning to renovate wasn't going to be hers, because I was leaving it to her. It was hers because her biological great-grandmother had already paid for it years before she was even born. There was one condition in that trust I had never known about. One clause I only discovered after receiving Richard's letter. If Rosalind ever learned the truth about her paternity, if it was ever proven that I wasn't her biological father, the entire inheritance would be voided. Helena's grandmother had been old-fashioned about bloodlines and legitimacy. The trust was structured to ensure her great-granddaughter would only inherit if she remained within the family she was born into. Richard Peton, claiming his daughter, would cost Rosalind everything. As I watched Rosalind measure those windows, I realized I had two choices. I could let a dying man destroy her financial security to satisfy his dying wish to meet her. Or I could tell her the truth myself, on my own terms, in a way that might allow her to keep her inheritance. The trust had a third option. If the adoptive father voluntarily disclosed the adoption and relinquished his parental claim before any outside party established paternity, the inheritance could be transferred directly to Rosalind without the legitimacy clause taking effect. I would have to admit I wasn't her biological father, tell her about her mother's affair, and reveal 30 years of lies. But I could do it in a way that protected her financial future. "Rosalind," I said again, my voice louder this time, pulling her out of her reverie. "Put down the measuring tape. We really need to talk." She finally looked at me, and something in my expression must have warned her. This wasn't a conversation about kitchen renovations. "What's wrong, Dad? You look like someone died." I sat down heavily in the armchair that had been mine for 3 decades, in the house that had never truly been mine at all. "Someone is dying," I said quietly. "And before he does, there are things you need to know about your inheritance, about this house, about your mother, about me." I pulled out the folder I had been carrying for 2 weeks, filled with Richard Peton's letters, his lawyer's threats, the trust documents, and the adoption papers I had filed when she was 6 months old. "Rosalind, I need you to sit down. What I'm about to tell you is going to change everything you thought you knew about our family." She sank onto the couch, her measuring tape forgotten on the floor between us. I explained the trust fund, the inheritance conditions, and the financial implications of Richard Peton's paternity claim. I showed her the numbers, the house, the investment accounts, and the education funds for her own children. "If you want to meet him, I'll support that decision completely," I said. "But if you do, you need to understand what you'll be giving up." She was quiet for a long time, staring at the document spread across the coffee table. "How long have you known he wanted to meet me?" "He's been trying to contact you for 10 years, I admitted. "I've been intercepting his attempts because I wanted to protect you. But now he's dying, and his lawyers are threatening to expose everything if I don't step aside." 10 years? Her voice was small, hurt. "Dad, I had a right to know." "You're right," I admitted. "I was selfish. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, I'd lose you. You're the best thing that ever came out of my marriage to your mother, and I couldn't bear the thought of sharing you with someone else." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Helena had planted when Rosalind was a toddler. "Does he know about me? I mean, really know me?" "He's been watching from a distance," I said. "He has pictures, knows about your job, your husband, your kids. But he doesn't know you, Rosalind. Not the way I do." "What's he like?" she asked. "He's a successful doctor, respected in his field," I replied. "Never married, no other children. You would be his only family, and he's dying." She turned back to face me, and I saw a reflection of her mother in her expression. The same look of someone wrestling with an impossible choice. "If I meet him, I lose the inheritance. If I don't meet him, he dies alone, never knowing his daughter." "That's the situation," I confirmed. "What would you do?" she asked. I looked at this woman I had raised, this person who had called me dad for 30 years, who had asked me to walk her down the aisle, and who had been there when my grandsons took their first steps. "I would choose family," I said. "But I can't tell you which family to choose, sweetheart. That decision, has to be yours." She was quiet for another long moment. "I want to meet him," she finally said. "I want to hear his side of the story. I want to know why he and Mom made the choices they made. And I want him to know that despite everything, I had a good father. That you were a good father." Tears I had been holding back for weeks finally started to fall. "It's going to cost you everything, Rosalind." "No," she said, coming over to hug me. "It's going to cost me money, money I never knew I had from people I never knew. But I already have everything that matters. I have you. I have my family. I have the life you and Mom built for me." 2 weeks later, I sat in a hospital room, watching my daughter meet her biological father for the first time. Richard Peaton was thin, frail, but his eyes lit up the moment she walked in. "You look just like your mother," he whispered. "So I've been told," Rosalind replied, taking the chair beside his bed. "But apparently I have your stubbornness," he laughed, a sound that turned into a cough. "Thank you," he said, looking at me over her shoulder. "Thank you for letting me meet her." "Thank her," I replied. "It was her choice." The paternity test results came back 3 days later, officially confirming what we had all known. The trust fund was voided that same afternoon. Rosalind lost the house, the investments, everything Helena's grandmother had left for her. But she gained something else. For 6 weeks, she had conversations with a man who had loved her from a distance her entire life, who shared stories about her mother that I had never known. He died peacefully, knowing his daughter had grown up to be exactly the kind of person he had hoped she would become. Richard Peaton passed away on a Tuesday morning with Rosalind holding his hand. She inherited nothing from him except his medical journals and a letter he had written to her every year on her birthday. Letters he had never sent but kept in a box beside his bed. 28 letters, starting from the day she was born and ending with the day he died. At his funeral, she stood up to speak, and her first words were about the man who had raised her. "My father always taught me that family isn't about biology," she said. "It's about choice. It's about showing up. It's about loving someone, even when it's complicated, even when it costs you something, even when the truth is harder than the lies." She looked directly at me in the front row. "I lost an inheritance, but I gained a story. I learned that my mother was human, that she made mistakes in desperate times. I learned that my biological father was a man who carried love and regret for 30 years. And I learned that my real father, my dad, loved me enough to tell me the truth, even when it meant losing everything."